Is it true that things like music and even scent, help us to remember things? Is that
Yeah, so there is the Proust Madeleine example of how a scent or a taste are very strongly influenced with, or can enhance memories. Music, well, it's all about associations, and I think this could be a good opportunity to turn to Josh's fascinating project, but we have to remember that all these memories, that everything in our brain is connected with everything else. So all the representations, all the knowledge that we have, you can get from every concept to any other concept. It's just a matter of how many degrees of separation, so to speak. But all the representations are associated with other things. There's nothing that in our brain that's remembered in isolation, in vacuum, because otherwise you won't be able to access it. And from here we derive a good method of remembering, which is to find associations. And if you have to remember where you parked or a certain string of numbers, I mean, more humane strings than what you've been memorizing, but a telephone number, you kind of connect it with something, even numbers, it's like my date of birth or something like this. So you always want to connect it to something, and even if you show in the lab to people abstract patterns that we just create, you can see that people think about this looks like an octopus, and this looks like a car, and this guy looks like an elephant from the front, things like that. So you want to connect with us. So music and scent just provide other sources of associations.
I want to actually just go back to what you were saying about memory and the ways that our memories shape how we make sense of the world. Because I think this is a really important point that I think there's a prevailing sort of metaphor in our culture right now that is dangerous. And it's shaping a lot of how we think about memory. And it is that our memory is like this bank that we put information into and we take information out of. And therefore, if I have an iPhone in my pocket, which I do somewhere here, and I put information into the iPhone, that's actually equivalent to my putting it into my brain. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to what Google is doing now, Google Glass. This is, I swear to God, you guys are all going to be wearing these in 5 years, essentially having the internet projected straight onto your retina. This is Google's next product, and Apple's going to have a product like it soon enough. And if you ask Sergey Brin and Larry Page, they would tell you, and this is on the record, that their long-term vision for what Google should be is that you should have some sort of a little chip in your brain, and you'll think of the question, and the answer will just appear to you. They are on the record saying that. That's what the most important technological company in the world is working towards as their goal. And that's based on this metaphor that information memories are like things that we look up in a book. And what I think Moshe's research points to is the ways in which that's not true. The ways in which our memories are actually helping us shape our perception of the world, our understanding of the world, the way we move through it, the judgments we make in it, the ways we act, our decisions about the future. And you can't outsource those memories to some external bank and still expect to be a real human being capable of moving through the world. I wonder what you would say to that.
Well, actually, I love this point, and I want to add, before I forget, it's hard to avoid talking about memory and appearing like making puns, but before we forget, we have to keep in mind that that there's also memory distortion. It's an interesting issue, not only of forgetting things. Forgetting is one thing, then you're aware, I just can't recall this fact, but sometimes memories are distorted, and in that way they also, it's not a 100% foolproof, reliable database that you can just pull things as you please and use this information. This information can be distorted while you store it and while you're retrieving it. And there are many cases, interesting cases. I have a colleague that I really adore her work, Elizabeth Loftus, that I think shook a lot in the law system, talking about eyewitness testimony. So you ask two people that witnessed the same accident, and they give you like the Kurosawa Rashomon that give you completely, not completely, but very different story of what they saw, even the color of the car. You can affect what people retrieve from memory just by asking them the question differently. If they ask subjects, or that's how we call them, subjects, but these are human beings who come to participate in our experiments. If you show them a video of an accident or a car hitting into a wall, and you ask them what was the velocity of the car that smashed into the wall versus what was the velocity of the car that hit the wall, they give you different estimates. So you really can lead a witness by framing the question and in a way framing their memories in a different way.
You talk about distortion. Is every memory somehow distorted every time we retrieve it and reshape it, look at it? Is it a bit different?
That's actually a brilliant idea in neuroscience that just came about. It's very very nice to hear it from somebody who's you're not scientist, right?
Yeah.
So people talk about a concept that's called reconsolidation. So just the fact that you retrieve information from memory already can modify this memory, especially if you retrieve it in different contexts. So, there's definitely an issue in retrieving the memory. It's almost like reliving it. And if you relive it in different contexts, so you add different informations, that this changes the memory. And just because I mentioned this extreme case of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder, it's another dream we have of being able to modify the trauma that's involved in remembering a certain information, because if they can retrieve it often enough and you can modify it every time they retrieve it, then at the end the memory won't be so traumatic.
So in the law, in the courtroom, this is a problem, right? When people can't give you an accurate representation of what actually historically happened, but it's possible, and I would argue that it's necessary for us as human beings to actually engage in that distortion. That part of what's happening, so this idea of reconsolidation, is every time we access a memory, we're actually reactivating it in some way, and reactivating it in the light of who we are at that present moment. And who we are at that present moment is different from who we were when that memory originally happened and the last time we recalled. And every time we reactivate it, that memory can mutate ever so slightly. And over time, the distance between what actually happened and what we remember to have happened can grow to be quite great. It's a problem in the courtroom, but it may be necessary to the ways that we construct ourselves, this narrative of who we are and what we're doing here on planet Earth and why we are the way that we are. Those are stories, and they're stories that are woven together out of, on some level, certainly a selective reading of the past, and maybe even a distorted reading of the past. And I would argue, just to bring this full circle again, that there's like something Jewish in that this is what Yosef Yerushalmi is talking about with Jewish memory versus Jewish history, right? We, for a long time, engaged with the past through this idea of memory, not of events that had a time and a place and a historical truth, but events that had a truth in memory. And we weren't that concerned with the historical truth, we were concerned with the memorial truth. And that is actually how I think, as individuals, we function on a certain level. And that there may be something similarly productive for us as individuals in the way that this process was similarly productive for the Jewish people, to create a kind of a collective memory. We do the same thing as individuals, but maybe that's too ambitious.
Well, I like it a lot. I think it's very poetic, and I think there's a good, I mean, I agree with you completely that we should all have, maintain our own version of how things happen and what do we take from a certain context or scenario or an episode. And you're completely right that we take different things. Even if you take, you read the same story to people that are in good mood versus people that are in bad mood, they remember certain different things from the same story. So there is some individual, and we do want to maintain it for the human experience. But at the same time, when you want to rely in court on facts, you have to keep this in mind, that the facts are fragile, and you have to know how to kind of circumvent this specific distortion. So I agree with you that there is something pretty and humane about the fact that we have our own take on things, but at the same time, when you talk about facts, that you want to get out of people in court, you want it to be black and white, right?